Okay, thank you. Very nice to be here with you. So my name is Markus. I'm an architect, writer, and professor for urban regeneration at the University of Luxembourg, where we're sitting at the moment. And it's fantastic to have Cesar on the team now. I've been involved for, I guess it's kind of shocking to say, but around 15 years. With the issue of participation and participatory politics when it comes to spatial planning. And I've also been researching issues around spatial assembly and the question how participation and spatial politics taps into that. So this is the kind of current research theme. Also what we're doing here in Luxembourg is, let's say, the interface between questions around participation, assembly, and how this taps into the whole transition movement. Wow, okay. I mean, if it was supposed to relate to kind of practice questions, I hope that I've already done it. I mean, the cross-benching book, which is, I mean, you mentioned the trilogy, so the participation trilogy. I mean, actually, it's not really a trilogy, but it's actually 4 books. But one was more like a kind of catalog that connected to an exhibition at the Lyon Biennial, so I don't really count this so much. But so basically, it started with, did someone say participate, and then the nightmare of participation, and the final part of the trilogy is called cross-benching, which is kind of like the propositional part. So the nightmare of participation was still kind of, let's say, more like an overview or a kind of, let's say, contextualization and already, let's say, reading and partially also critique. But it wasn't really a proposition, whereas in cross-benching, which is a very kind of small, kind of short volume, I mean, it's a book, but it's almost like kind of extended booklet, you could say. I'm trying to describe what I think this role is or what could be interesting about this role. And I think that this is something that, of course, also in a way is trying to describe what I'm doing or how I've tried to look at spatial practice and questions around spatial production. So cross-benching could be a title, but I don't think that it would fully reflect my kind of private life, but maybe there would probably have to be some kind of like a subtitle that includes decentralization.
That could be a possibility.
Hopefully this will change. The first book that I remember that I actually read twice was The Myth of Sisyphus, which was something that we had to read during the kind of A-levels period of high school. And it was, pretty much actually the only book that I remember that, I think it's always interesting when you're in school and you're being told to read books. Of course, psychologically, what happens is that right from the beginning, you're actually not really into reading it.
You reject it.
But this one was like super interesting and very enjoyable. So I actually reread it kind of, a couple of weeks after we had to write, we had to also write a test about it and like an exam. And so then a couple of weeks later, I read it again just on like summer holidays. So this, I even remember how my parents thought that this was super strange that I actually read something just because I wanted to read.
They were like, are you sick or?
I have to admit that I never really, for sure in my early teens, I didn't read a lot. I was listening to a lot of audiobooks actually. And then I really started reading a lot when I started my studies in Glasgow. This was the time when I really started reading a lot. And of course, there's some children's books that I remember quite vividly that were read to me when I was little.
Yeah.
And I always remember also that, my mom would always read let's say, very pleasant stories to us. And then I remember, like, we had one babysitter who read, or who started reading, like, Moby Dick, and it totally freaked the shit out of me. I mean, I was so scared.
You really get into the story and felt like, nice, interesting. So you may say that Moby Dick was one of those first books, or any other children
definitely
book?
of the ones that I remember.
When you publish books, do you think that they are tools for discussion, spaces of encounter with other ideas? Why you make books?
I mean, you already mentioned two very good examples or reasons. I mean, they're definitely, I think, a good bridge, let's say, between people and to trigger off discussions. And of course, in a way, a book is a discursive space.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for me, it's also very important to produce something. I find it, I mean, for me, book is almost like an architectural project. So I think, you know, when, let's say, you're thinking a lot, or when you're discussing a lot, for example, also in the context of a university or any kind of educational environment, I think that's a fantastic way to kind of solidify and kind of contextualize what you're doing. I think also it manages to contextualize what you're doing in the kind of larger field and practices of what other people are doing either at the moment or maybe also what they have done in the past. But in a way, bookmaking itself, for me, it's also very interesting because it really gives you a kind of confined space. And when I say space, I also mean kind of time space in which you do something and there's a specific result. And one thing that I really enjoy there is that there's the lead time, let's say, to a product is fairly short. So, I mean, for all of you who are listening now who may come or who may have an architectural background, of course, the most frustrating thing about architecture is that it takes forever. And by the time that you are actually standing in front of or inside a finished product, usually so much time has been passed from the moment that you started or from the moment that the first idea was born, that you may not even agree anymore with where it originally came from, you know? And so this is why, in general, I really prefer working on formats that are where the lead time is shorter and where you can see a result quite quickly, even if it may be unfinished and if it's kind of in flux. And that's also how I would consider like all my book production. I mean, I totally don't understand. I mean, I don't really understand them as academic books, so I hope that they speak to a larger audience also in terms of the language that I use. But also, I never really understand them as anything that's set in stone, but something that's always kind of in motion. And it's, you know, it's the book or a book is never a final point, but it's kind of like chapters in a way. And you may realize, you know, in the third chapter that what you said in the first chapter was half true or unfinished or even a complete mistake, because in the meantime you've learned how maybe things have changed or how, according to what you've learned in the meantime, really changed your kind of perception about a particular subject or practice. What is the smell of a book? I mean, it really depends what kind of book it is. I mean, it's a bit like concrete. Also, it's really amazing that depending on the weather and depending on where it is, it also has different smells. I mean, for me, usually when I think of books and when I think of smell, I always think of something very dry. I mean, almost like sometimes a little bit like when you smell sand.